This game is literally poop. It's Virtual Lab on a very tragic episode of Virtual Boy Works. As our journey through Virtual Boy's library draws to a conclusion, I can't help but reflect on the fact that, as you've discovered with me, the console's hateful reputation is largely undeserved. Yes, the hardware stumbled over some conceptual failures at a fundamental level, but the games that shipped on Virtual Boy weren't anywhere near as hopeless as nearly 25 years of punditry would suggest. Of course, well-regarded titles like Wario Land and Jack Brothers turned out to be obvious wins, but think about how many Virtual Boy creations exceeded their dire internet reputations. For example, INNSMOUTH no YAKATA was, contrary to rumor, a tense and thrilling corridor shooter. Panic Bomber was a fun puzzler. Golf was good. WATERWORLD was flawed but interesting. Even NESTER'S funky bowling offered a pretty decent rendition of the sport. With this in mind, we arrive at the next Virtual Boy release to suffer from a dire reputation, J-Wing's Virtual Lab, widely regarded as the absolute worst officially licensed title for the console. Based on previous experience though, it stands to reason that this means Virtual Lab is probably actually going to be pretty good, right? Well, no. Every once in a while, you come across a game that is universally reviled, and that universal point of view is actually bang on. Virtual Lab is one of those. On its surface, it doesn't seem like it should be terrible. It's a falling block puzzler, and we've seen several of those already on the platform. Virtual Boy's puzzle games have ranged from the merely okayish 3D Tetris to the legitimately enjoyable V-Tetris. Virtual Lab is cut from the same cloth as Tetris and also incorporates an element of Lucasfilm Games' Pipe Dream. Surely that's a winning combination. But no, Virtual Lab manages to be a deeply unpleasant game on every possible level. It is indeed the absolute worst Virtual Boy has to offer. Let's begin with the aesthetics, shall we? I mean, just look at this game. It's Pipe Dream, yes, but with segments of intestine, I think. Well, based on the back of the box, I think they're supposed to be worms, but they sure don't look like it. The gameplay consists of linking together falling pieces of conduit which appear to have been carved from someone's colon. The pieces throb and writhe in a grotesquely biological fashion, as though you're chaining together the blueprint for your very own homegrown human centipede. The whole thing looks vaguely nauseating, and it doesn't help that the shapes you create along the way frequently take on the appearance of both male and female reproductive organs.
That's a penis!
And fittingly, the designers behind Virtual Lab were clearly hoping to get a rise out of reproductive organs with a little bit of 3D titillation. The game does very little to make use of Virtual Boy's parallax graphical effects, focusing most of their efforts in that area into the game's mascot, a busty young woman who stands to the right of the puzzle well. As you play, the young woman's bosom heaves constantly, and her breasts pop out in 3D. This is Virtual Lab's one area of innovation. It did 3D boobs years before SHANTAE and the Pirate's Curse or Senran Kagura, so points for being a pioneer in naughtiness, I guess. The thing is, the effect ends up just being weird, because the mascot character's bouncing bits are barely animated and appear to move at random rather than with any sense that resembles the motion of actual human anatomy. I think they were trying to imitate Magical Drop 3's world and her fan service bounce, but it really needs some fine-tuning. But that's just par for the course in Virtual Lab. The whole thing feels like the developers saw stuff in other puzzle games, said, oh, we should do that, and promptly made a complete hash of it. Consider the Tetris element. Pieces fall from above into the well as you'd expect. But even this fundamental puzzle mechanic is a mess. There's a maddening control lag to Virtual Lab that renders the game insanely imprecise. When you tap the controller, a piece will either move no spaces laterally, or it'll move two. Getting an object to move a single space for precise positioning is a lot harder than you'd think it would be, much harder than it has any right to be. The one saving grace, I suppose, is that the pieces fall with agonizing slowness. You can begin the game by selecting one of 3 speed levels, but here's the thing. All 3 speeds are hilariously slow, giving you ample time to place your pieces. Even more hilariously, the fastest speed setting does not actually give you the fastest gameplay. Instead, you'll find the top speed in the mid-speed setting. Not that a faster version of Virtual Lab would be an improvement in any case. Besides the gummy controls you have to deal with, there's a bigger issue at work here. The mechanics are in desperate need of refinement. The idea behind Virtual Lab is to create closed systems of pipe or intestine or whatever. You're given 5 different types of conduit to work with, all at random, and your mission is to create the largest and most complex structures you can with no open ends within the play space. The 5 active gut chunks consist of straight pipe bits, 90-degree bends, T-intersections, 4-way cross conduits, and end caps. If you can lay these randomly generated modules into an arrangement in which all tubes are sealed or connected, that entire structure vanishes. Happily, a piece that's open on a side touching the edge of the well counts as closed. However, your structure does not count as closed if any piece is not capped or connected to another tube on any side not touching the well wall. This becomes a real nuisance when multiple pieces begin dropping at once because you have very little control over the arrangement of those falling objects. It's all too easy to drop a piece next to an open intestine without making a connection, at which point you're left unable to complete the connection for that open end, rendering the entire structure incapable of being cleared away. If you end up stuck with a large construct that has a blocked up, incomplete connection, it becomes a dead mass clogging up the well. An intestinal blockage, if you will. Your only recourse is to hope you can create and complete a separate large construct that will give you a little breathing room. See, anytime you complete a structure that consists of 10 or more blocks, you'll get a clear bonus. Not only does the structure disappear, but you'll also be rewarded by a little fairy that flies across the screen and smashes up the bottommost line of pieces with a pickaxe. Once the fairy clears away the bottom line, all pieces on the screen will drop a level, and there's a decent chance that breaking away the lowest row of pieces will clear away jams or even create chain combos of vanishing blocks. It's a promising game mechanic for sure, but it doesn't quite work here because the developers clearly didn't put enough thought into the overall flow of the game. The big problem is that it's far too common for the pieces creating blockages to be blocked themselves, resulting in a nested chain of impossible to clear intestine connections. The only way to get a leg up on this kind of situation is to create and clear a separate large construct, something that can easily become impossible to achieve within the limited space of the well with the random pieces the game dispenses. Most puzzle games in the Tetris mode have a sort of rapid failure curve. If you screw up and get into an unwinnable situation, your game is going to be over sometime within the next few seconds. But a doomed scenario in Virtual Lab can drag on for several minutes thanks to the game's sluggish speed and awkward design. It is a mess. Throughout Virtual Boy works, I've suggested that promising games for the system probably would have turned out a lot better if they'd been given a little more time for polish. That seems to be particularly true in the case of Virtual Lab, a game that is widely regarded as having shipped incomplete. Although there's no proof of this, the game certainly offers plenty of evidence to support that widespread speculation. It's a rough game with ill-considered mechanics, glitchy controls, truly offensive audio, jarringly poor visuals, and what appears to be a password system despite the lack of a password input option. Was Virtual Lab rushed to market? That would certainly seem to be the case. The one thing the Virtual Boys for Shitano have in common is that all 4 of them shipped in December 1995, after which nothing else came out for the system in Japan. Once Nintendo shipped Wario Land in Japan, that was it. Beginning in January 1996, the only remaining Virtual Boy releases anywhere in the world happened in the US. It seems pretty likely that when Nintendo decided to shut down the platform, it put out a last call. Get your games out now, or spike the project altogether. So you saw a rush of publishers determined to cash in as quickly as possible, regardless of quality. I mean, the packaging for Virtual Lab misspells Nintendo's name twice, in 2 different ways. It's like even Nintendo stopped paying attention. Not all the games pushed through at the end of Virtual Boy's Japanese run were bad, but the better ones came from more established publishers like Taito and Athena. Games from smaller or newer companies like Japan Supply System Bound High ended up being bad or cancelled. Virtual Lab hails from what appears to be the very definition of a small company. According to the copyright screen, Virtual Lab seems to have been developed by a company called Nakoti. I say seems because their name appears here on the title screen and in no other video game ever. For all we know, Nakoti is just a person. Meanwhile, publisher J-Wing was just embarking on a decade-long run as a purveyor of Game Boy and PlayStation software. But as of this point, they only had 3 releases under their belt. It's entirely likely that both companies needed to recoup whatever profits they could from Virtual Lab's development in order to survive. Of course, it's hard to imagine Virtual Lab was in any way the game to save the day. Besides its utter wretchedness, it also appears to have been produced in vanishingly tiny numbers. It comes in second in the ranks of spendy Virtual Boy releases, exceeded in aftermarket price only by the absolute final Japanese release, Virtual Bowling. Altogether, Virtual Lab is an unmitigated mess of a game whose main reason for being ultimately amounts to serving as a deterrent to gathering a complete Virtual Boy collection. If you want to own the console's full set, at some point you're going to have to drop $2,000 on a game that I wouldn't want to pay $2 for. It's fitting, then, that Virtual Lab is a game about chaining together massive lengths of large intestine. Because this game is poop. Next time on Virtual Boy Works, you know things are dire when an SD Gundam game represents a welcome change of pace.